stylized action sequences, creatively bloody fight scenes, heavy thematic elements, actual storytelling, and characters that are brilliantly portrayed with depth and relatability. All of that is present in Blue-Eyed Samurai, and we're going to go over why I think this is such a fantastic show. If you look at Rotten Tomatoes, it's 100% with the critics, like 97% with the audience. That's not a gamed metric. This show deserves every bit of credit and praise that it's gotten, and I'm going to go over exactly why it surprised me and why I think it's so good. This is comparable, at least in the quality and depth of the storytelling, to like the first 2/3 of Game of Thrones. The only thing Game of Thrones has is that it was bigger and more epic, and there were more characters, more things going on. But the layering of themes on top of a story that's interesting, along with the style and pacing, it's like, this is unlike anything I've ever seen. So let's start with the plot. Like I said, there is one, and apparently these days people think that is an optional feature of storytelling, which is kind of bizarre. The main complaint I hear about the Marvels that just came out is people are like, I'm not really sure what this thing was about. Like, I can tell you what happened, but it's very this and this and this and this all the way to the end, which is horrendous storytelling. I mean, that's like 101. The premise of Blue-Eyed Samurai is you have Mizu, who is a half-breed. She is half white, half Japanese. 1600s Japan. Only 4 white men in Japan at that time because Japan was closed off to the rest of the world. It was very isolationist. And she being so bitter about what happened to her mother, about how she was raised and treated, and how she was bullied and seen as a monster for having blue eyes, being half European.
Your poor mother killed herself because your father is a white devil.
She seeks out to kill the 4 men, each one of which might be her father. And as she goes along, she meets interesting characters. Each one is represented with depth and care and creativity. And the circumstances they find themselves in are not only kind of realistic as being a byproduct of everybody's actions. It's not just some random shit happened, but also they have to engage with the things that happen, and it reacts onto them and it affects how they go through their arc. There are stakes here, which is really fantastic. The thematic elements in this, like I said, are densely packed. I mean, again, she's biracial in this really closed off ethno state. And this hit me for a couple of reasons, because we've dealt with this in American media, trying to kind of drive home to the audience what it's like to be looked at differently or discriminated against. It's very interesting to see it so thoroughly represented in another culture that is very ethnocentric in its traditions and the ways it sees the outside world. And the way we relate to it is by seeing how this exists in so many other cultures where the society is rigid and oppressive, and it hates and rejects anything that looks different, to where she's not only bullied and beaten and mistreated and neglected, but actively called a monster by people that are actually close to her, by people she has relationships with. We see a blue-eyed mixed European Japanese samurai, female badass. We're like, well, that's kind of cool. But you realize that in a lot of these rigid cultures, not so much. Seeing it kind of inverted that way from how we normally approach that in American media makes me wonder how other people who might have been numb to it or kind of rolled their eyes when they see these types of portrayals of a discriminated figure, if they relate to it differently now that somebody being discriminated against because of their whiteness. That's kind of interesting to me, but also the way that they're able to handle it given how severe things were in that time. And the thing she has to go through is heartbreaking. I mean, right off the bat, you relate to the underdog character because of how poorly she's treated and how singularly motivated she is. She also has, and this is the thing that makes my hair stand on end, it's the self-loathing. She hates this part of herself, like in her bones. She considers herself a monster. She says, I need to get to the men that made me a monster. And I mean, it's heartbreaking, but you see that as part of her character and as far as she develops and grows forward. There's typical arcs in these type of things like loyalty to honor and principle and to each other. There's this samurai code that's very pervasive, and you see how enemies interact. There's formal duels. I mean, she has a contract to a duel that she's supposed to uphold with a samurai whose pride she took, and they want to orchestrate a fight to the death, but then they have to engage with each other, and they have responsibilities aside from that. And there's this very weird, like, the alliances are all formed by not just what suits them in the present moment, but also this commitment to like this formal system. And then as she goes along, she picks up an understudy, somebody who wants to be an apprentice, who's kind of the goofy Ringo, who gives just the right amount of comedic relief here. It's not so over the top as you might see in a lot of anime properties. And he's kind of the simpleton, and she has to almost end up kind of earning his respect because she's so dark and jaded. But as an apprentice, he also has expectations of her as this samurai that he's trying to follow. And that changes her as she goes on.
Anything so I can learn to be just like you.
Like me?
You're deformed, but you're still strong.
Not losing yourself to vengeance is a big one. Obsession is another one because she is so singularly obsessed, and there's a point where you see the cost of diving into this type of thing full bore, where it ends up costing you your soul. All of these themes are very heavily presented, and then there's more that bleed into all of these characters, specifically a lot of the women that have to survive in this kind of isolated, like feudal era Japan, where things are extremely patriarchal. The style is worth noting because the artwork, I'm in love with the artwork. I've never been a fan specifically of manga, anime, or even like samurai or martial arts movies as a genre. Anyways, I've enjoyed plenty of them, but I've never been really just over the moon for that particular type of style, especially with animated stuff. I was raised on Disney movies, and then through the 70s and 80s, there's so many like good detailed hand-drawn Western movies that they don't do anymore. They had so much character and so much texture and detail into the way the characters were written and their expressions. And then when I got a little older and I started seeing what a lot of my friends liked, which was anime and manga, it was hard for me to cross over because the artistic style is so much more simplified, angular, cartoonish, washed out, and it does what it does well in its own right. It was just bridging that gap is really hard for me. And there have been examples that are more detailed, that are more like gritty and textured that I have come to like. But generally as a style, I've never really jumped in. This, I don't know what the actual artistic process is. It looks rotoscoped, which was an old school method where you would like film people live action, and then the lines and artwork would go over like live action references, so it made the lines look almost alive, where everything was a lot more fluid, but it's a very distinct style. This is all certainly computer generated, and you know that for no other reason that the characters don't look like they're voice actors, but it looks so real, and it has that fluidness, that realism, that detail, that heart, that expression that can be easily missed in most animated representations, especially when you have a lot of people working to turn out a lot of frames really quickly. So it does look live action, but also the artistic aspect, the painting, the colors, the texture, the abstract features of it are not gone. And they can use that in a really interesting way to create really compelling scenes, but also have characters that are so vivid. I really love this. It's like Arcane, just a little more clean, kind of classical look, I guess, to fit the style of the era that they're talking about. Now, with the style, the way it approaches a plot, the beats are, again, similar to like those anime or like samurai type of mediums, where Western culture, and this has been a point of contention for a while, is like Western mediums, like television, movies, comic books, have just lost the plot, no pun intended, as to what writing and storytelling and plots are and how you're supposed to evolve a character over time. They've been so fixated on featuring their type of character, and I don't want to get into the activism theme, but trying to feature a specific type that's important, and that mission is more important than the craft itself. And writing tends to go out the window. And then there's confusion as to why, hey, I'm giving you this new inclusive thing that fits all the beats of modern society. Why aren't you over the moon about it? And it's like, well, because the story kind of sucked. I don't know why I'm supposed to like this thing other than you think it looks a certain way or performs some task for representing a group of people. To this day, one of the reasons like manga continues to be so popular ahead of modern comic books is the writing, the storytelling, the way that it engages the characters. Those beats are present here, and it is all the better for it. It's not afraid to take risks with characters. It's very dramatic. There's a purpose to the characters being there besides their name or what group they belong to, and it adds the depth. It gains an extra element of realism. It treats the characters seriously, who they are, what their motivations are, why they behave the way they do, and how that works out when you put a bunch of them together. There's a consistency. The characters feel real, and there's no point where a character does something and you're like, that doesn't make sense based off what you just told me. And their interactions seem to just bounce off each other flawlessly, which stands out. That used to be just good storytelling. Now it stands out because it's so few and far between. Now, there is an interesting aspect to this I want to get into, which is the fact that all of the voice actors that play Japanese characters are in fact Asian. I wanted to point out the voice actor thing. The voice actors were chosen correctly 100%. This is the most well-cast array of voice actors in any animated property. They all do exceptionally well. And they're people you know and like. George Takei's in it. You have Brenda Song, Randall Park, Masi Oka. And they're all very distinct. They're all very skilled. And they all do everything exceptionally well. I just have to point out the fact that they are all Asian actors, which I find interesting for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, they're not all Japanese. You have the voice of Taigen is a quarter Japanese. And then you have Randall Park, who's Korean. And I point this out because this is such a new standard and people buy into it so much. And I have to push back against it because it used to be that it's a fictional character you're creating, hand drawing, writing for by a team of people. And the voice is just part of it. And human voices are interchangeable. I mean, aside from some style notes, we don't think like, oh, these Asian people have an Asianiness to their voice that we need to capture. It would make sense, I guess, if they were speaking Japanese or speaking in an accent to like not be offensive. But all these characters, most of them anyways, are speaking regular ass American English. So it's really bizarre to me that they went out of their way to cast Japanese voice actors, but only kind of. And it's like, what is the important factor of that? Is there something unique in their voice you need to preserve? Why is it okay to have a Korean portray somebody who's Japanese, or somebody who's only a quarter Japanese portray somebody who's Japanese? How does this math work? And the only reason I say this is because people get really dogmatic about this stuff and they get really up in arms when the representative thing is flipped a little bit. It really just seems like the rules are made up. It's really performative and it doesn't make anything better. A great example in watching this, I was thinking about Samurai Jack. It was a really influential cartoon that was voiced by really famous voice actor and comedian Phil Lamar, who's done a bunch of voice work. It's not obvious that it's just going to be like white people benefiting by taking all of the jobs. Phil Lamar was a great voice actor. Could he voice Samurai Jack today based on these rules? Probably not. And what if you're part of a minority group that rarely gets represented? Are you just pigeonholed into that group and you have to wait if that representation happens? It's a really bizarre thing. I just have to point it out that it's a very small complaint. I mean, for people that are going in looking for woke thumbprints, that just seems to be, that's like an industry standard now. But again, I have to say the voice acting was fantastic. From a delivery point of view, the quality was great. And then you also do worry that if this is a precedent, people fold themselves in half to cast the right group of people, that quality might suffer. That thankfully did not happen here. Now I want to get into the bloodiness, the gore, the horror, because that is a huge part of this. It has a very much of a Kill Bill feel. In fact, one of the scenes, it was great, starts off with the Kill Bill theme songs. And there's like Japanese covers of Metallica songs. It's the sound, the score is insane, but when you pair it with the creative violence, I mean, really creative choreography with the swords, it was like they sat in a room with like the Mythbuster, like ballistic gel shaped like a person and just had a sword. And we're like, how many different ways can we slice this? Like, okay, if we cut it here, this bone's going to stick out this way. Then we can take that leg and use it as a dagger to stick in somebody's ear. It goes over the top. And I love that. I love like Grindhouse. I love practical effect, like really corny, over the top, like 80s horror movies I'm a big fan of, to the point where I'll torture myself with something like Terrifier that's more disturbing, but part of me still gets some enjoyment out of like over the top creative displays of violence. And the fact that they incorporate that into really artfully done fight scenes, there is a bit of disbelief that has to be suspended. It's a bit girl bossy. So of course it has Mizu, the main character, as a female who is representing herself as a man to not be taken advantage of, or to also get access to other places she couldn't as a woman, doing all kinds of things that you just kind of roll your eyes like, obviously not. But when she's scaling a tower with 180 pounds of her buddy on her back and her fingernails are pulling her up in the cracks of the brick, and she slips and falls but saves herself with one hand without losing him, and you're like, okay, yeah, like not real. But in fairness, it's a samurai flick, and I just saw her fight like 100 ninjas by herself and like dominate all of them. This type of show requires suspending that disbelief, which you should do, because that's part of the genre. And if you can do that, you're going to have a blast with it. That's not the aspect that you're supposed to fixate on, because the realness of the characters, why it's relatable and why it hits home, is the depth of who they are, why they do what they do, the relatable emotional stuff. We want the over-the-top action, and this delivers it in some really insane ways. But the reason it works so well, and this is something I've been saying for a long time, the point isn't to get rid of wokeness. There's people that don't like stuff because it has woke stuff in it, and they're not woke, so I don't like that. Just like if you're an atheist, you see a Christian property, you're like, well, I hate that. And it doesn't speak to the quality or the mechanics of the thing that you're watching. I've always said that it's when the craft takes a backseat to the message you're trying to beat the viewer over the head with that it becomes bus stop advertisement, after school special, cheesy public service announcement propaganda. And that's when people hate it. And then they try to use their ideology as a shield to like deflect criticism. And it's like, no, it's like, it's not the strong female lead. It's that you don't know how to write a strong female lead. It's that your principles are corrupt, your approach is corrupt, and you created somebody with no arc, who's not flawed, who started overpowered and goes through no change. And we're supposed to care about it. And it's silly. This does the opposite of that. Mizu is overpowered, 100%, but not to the point where she doesn't suffer. And that's one of the beautiful things about this. The fight scenes show strain. It's not just jumping and slicing and cutting. It's like bloody, in your face, bare knuckle. You see bruises after every punch. You see stab wounds. Every time she takes on damage, she limps. There's times where she just gets beaten and battered and still goes for more. And the strain calls back in every single scene why she is doing what she's doing. It's one of the most brilliant applications of action in any movie or TV show I've ever seen. You feel it. It's like your eyes are lighting up by the flipping and spinning and slicing and dicing and the creative colors and scenery, and all of this is so over the top. But then at the same time, that like back of your brain, the emotional part of your brain is like feeling with your heart everything that she's feeling as she's forcing herself to go through. There are no like easy fights, as overpowered as she is. And there's also times where she has to turn and tuck tail and run and recover and come back. And there's like lessons in evolution, and it's fantastic. So really all the female characters, because she's not the only one, that show strength that is a result of the harsh area that they live in. They show that they are strong and resilient. They thrive because of the way that they engage. So it selects for them. It's not that all women are just strong. Most of them aren't. We're following the ones that had the traits that allowed them to thrive, that got selected for. And there's something brilliant about that. And it shows them all using strength in different ways too. And it's in ways that are believably feminine, not just take this female name and put it on a masculine archetype and call it good. So in that way, you can take the most like brain rotted MAGA Republican, like, I don't like woke anything, get that out of my schools, whatever, however extreme you take that, however much of a visceral vomit reaction that person gets to anything that looks progressive, that person can watch this, have a blast, but still be exposed to these basic human ideas of strength and perseverance, and be shown a strong female lead and have a great time with it. And guys, take notes. This is how you fucking win. This is how you do it. The fact that that wasn't the standard before shows that people weren't concerned with the outcome. They were concerned with lecturing people. And that's a big problem, because that tells me that you want to feel right more than you want to actually change anything or get your point across to the other side. And it's also not just women at the expense of men, because a lot of this strong female character stuff, it's really just the woman is strong because she's punishing men and all the men are just goons. These men, a lot of them in the show are excessively evil, cruel, cowardly, petty, power hungry, as you would expect throughout so much of history, especially when you're rising through the top of any political or governmental system. And it's with all films in this genre, it's the same way. You have a very obvious big bad. But there's male characters here that are treated with great respect. I mean, you have the closest thing she had to a father when she was abandoned and orphaned as a half-breed nobody wanted to be around, the blind sword maker, and he is treated with great respect. He taught her structure and discipline, and it shows him hitting her on the head when she makes a mistake, expecting her to be structured, regimented, disciplined. That's where she learned that. You have Ringo, who, like I said, is like just the right amount of goofy. He has no hands, which, I'm sorry, it's just never not funny, because he has to like tuck a knife into his wristband to like make noodles and like stab people. And he's a little bit goofy, he's simple, but he's a type of simpleton who exists to serve a point, that it really is like ego and intelligence that leads to a lot of corruption. Because Ringo is that type of, he's the guy who, when Mizu makes a misstep, his simple brain is saying, but wait, you're a samurai. You're supposed to be this. He's good and he's loyal and he's treated fondly and he's enjoyable to watch. And then you have Taigen, who's like a rival samurai, who is also treated with a lot more respect, even though he starts off as just a pompous, arrogant prick. And I was really surprised the direction they took that as well. And that actually goes to show the show does really interesting stuff with the characters that I didn't expect. There might have been some things I assumed about Mizu that weren't maybe correct. And that was refreshing to see because it tells you that these characters aren't tropey. They were invented from scratch, not to fit the same mold we've been fed 100 times. Also, there's stakes. Things can happen to characters. They can get mistreated. And even Mizu is not exempt from that. And because people suffer, you know that nobody is safe. So not only does it connect you to the themes, does it connect you to the meaning and who the characters are and why they're doing what they do, but you don't know what's coming next. Guys, this is good storytelling. I don't know how to describe it any other way. I was really thrilled with the way this came out. I recommend everybody try this show out, even if you don't like the genre. My wife decidedly doesn't like anime. She doesn't like cartoons. She cringes every time I have to get nostalgic by turning on Batman the Animated Series or dragging her to yet another Marvel movie, like I am tonight when we're going to expose ourselves to the Marvels because we hate ourselves. She loves this movie more than I did. She loved this show more than I did. We still have 2 episodes to go, by the way. We're almost all the way through it, and I had to force her to stop because we're running out of shows because we've been doing too quick. Anyways, I am so over the moon with this show for so many reasons. I really have a hard time believing that anybody who would be inclined to watch a samurai show to begin with, where you would find fault with this, where you wouldn't have a good time, where you wouldn't be entertained, where the story would fall short, where the style would fall short. I mean, if this show isn't the byproduct of just exhaustive research into Japanese culture to just give the most authentic feel, you still have to tip your hat because that means they engage in some of the most convincing world building that has ever happened on a TV show off of feel. And either one is commendable. So I really strongly recommend you guys check this out. Thanks for watching. Let me know what things you want to see me review. I'm bouncing around between different ideas and genres, so let me know in the comments. You can also follow me on my other channel. If you want to know anything about weightlifting, that's my primary channel. It's primarily what I do. You can find that at my name, Alexander Bromley. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.